Shabbat Shalom. On this Shabbat Hagadol, this Shabbat which precedes Pesach, the question I keep asking is this: Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot? Why is this night, this Shabbat, different from all other nights? And why will this Passover be different from other Passovers which have come before? This year, as we celebrate our festival of freedom, we do so against the backdrop of an existential fight for freedom and democracy in Israel, a fight that reached its boiling point earlier this week as the most far-right-leaning government in the history of the nation set its sights on reforming the Israeli judiciary by essentially crippling its ability to offer checks and balances on the legislative branch. Much of the Israeli public has exploded in impassioned, angry opposition. Many Israelis, fearful that these proposed changes to their Supreme Court would destroy their already fragile democracy, have risen up in unprecedented swells. They've stormed the streets from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, from Haifa to Beersheba, from Afula to Ashdod, from north to south and east to west. Israelis are demonstrating for all to see and hear. And so, as we open up our Haggadahs this Passover and read of the Israelite masses who were too numerous for Pharaoh, let us call to mind the masses of protesters in Israel battling for the very soul of their nation. Astoundingly, the protests grew even larger this past weekend in response to the firing of Yoav Gallant, the defense minister who dared voice his doubts about this proposed legislation. When news of his firing hit the airwaves, the metaphorical dam broke, sending throngs upon throngs of Israelis out of their homes and onto the streets. It's been reported that more than 600,000 Israelis gathered for demonstrations this past weekend. 600,000 in a country of just over 9 million. That's nearly 7% of the population, or about 1 in 15. That's 1 in 15 leaving their homes to loudly declare their rage at a government they feel doesn't have their interests at heart. 1 in 15 arising in the middle of the night to stand in the pouring rain screaming, "Shame! Shame on a government that only wants to serve its majority. Shame on a government that hurls racist epithets at its minorities. Shame on a government that openly incites violence against Palestinians." The protests were accompanied by labor strikes and mass shutdowns across Israel. Planes were grounded at the airport. Universities were shuttered. Public transportation was halted. Multiple municipal services were paused. And remarkably, in a bold show of principled activism, the mayors of Kfar Saba, Herzliya, and Zichron Yaakov went on a hunger strike in front of Prime Minister Netanyahu's office. As Professor Daniel Shamovitz, president of Ben-Gurion University, stated to the New York Times, there comes a time in the history of a people or an organization when you have to stand up and be counted. Thus, as we open our Haggadahs this Passover and read about the great resistors of our history, like Shifra and Puah, the midwives who openly defied Pharaoh's decree to kill Israelite children. Let us also think of our brothers and sisters openly and defiantly resisting in Israel, speaking truth to power. Heard amongst the protesters are chants like demokratia, the ancient Greek word for democracy, and Israel won't become a dictatorship. Some demonstrators carry enormous copies of Israel's Declaration of Independence, reminding the world of Israel's founding mission to ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants. Others hold up artful yet eviscerating posters, like one depicting Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, with a tear running down his cheek. The poster telegraphs the message that under this government, the dream of Israel is disintegrating. The vision is coming undone. These signs capture the acute fears of the moment, fears that the judicial changes will permanently alter the fabric of Israeli society, yielding a country in which individual freedoms for Palestinians, for women, for members of the LGBTQ+ community, for non-Orthodox Jews, and many more will not only be threatened, but eliminated. The stakes to protect Israel's citizens and democracy could not be any higher. And so, as we open our Haggadahs this Passover and read about Moses demanding to Pharaoh, "Let my people go," let us call to mind our Israeli brothers and sisters who are demanding that this new government let its racist, nativist, and homophobic platforms go, so that all the people of Israel, including all minorities, can live in peace and dignity. Even as Israel's democracy is in peril, it is so vital for us to acknowledge the extraordinary political engagement we're seeing right now. This is democracy in action, and the scale of it is unlike anything we've ever witnessed, here or there. What's even more incredible is that the movement doesn't belong to any one party or organization. It includes, notes author Anat Schneider, Orthodox religious Jews, secular citizens, young, old, women, men, and even children, all sectors as one nation. Gilad Kariv, a member of the Knesset and a Reform rabbi, adds, "We see young people, veterans, the former leaders and commanders of Israel's security agencies, they're all there, saying this judiciary reform will harm Israel." Yes, this is a movement and a moment that touches every generation, every class, and every part of Israeli society. Thus, as we open our Haggadahs this Passover and read, "We were slaves to Pharaoh, and we cried out to God, and we were delivered," let us remember the power of we and the power of a community bonded in common cause. What we see in Israel is a model of how to effect change. There is power in numbers and power in a people united. That being said, Israel as a whole is far from united. As these protests have waged on, it has become ever clearer that the social divisions in Israel are wide and only growing wider. Even though hundreds of thousands have voiced their opposition to these judicial reforms, there are numerous Israelis in favor of those reforms, and there have been counter-protests too. Israel and her citizenry are rife with discord and rancor. They are teeming with anger and frustration too. There are talks of compromise in the works, facilitated by President Isaac Herzog, but only time will tell what those will yield. Thus, as we open our Haggadahs this Passover and ask those 4 time-honored questions, let us take a moment to ponder the existential questions facing Israel right now. What does democracy truly entail? What can a democracy truly withstand? And if full equality does not exist for all citizens, can democracy truly prevail? These questions are not simply theoretical or hypothetical. They are clear and present and real. Israel and her citizens are in crisis, and they need our support, our engagement, our attention, and our care. Our reform institutions in Israel, the Israel Religious Action Center and the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism, both of whom are doing heroes' work in the fight for religious freedom and human dignity for all, they need our partnership. They need to know that we're here and that we'll stand by them today, tomorrow, and as long as it takes. We will and we must continue this fight. We will and we must continue to speak out. We will and we must continue to make Israel an integral part of our lives. And it is in these moments of challenge that we must remain all the more stalwart and steadfast, and yes, even hopeful. Hopeful that justice can and will prevail, hopeful that dignity can and will win out over immorality, and hopeful that equality can and will reign throughout the land. The journey we take on Passover always ends the same way. When we open our Haggadahs to that final page, it always reads, Bashana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. These words are words of hope and faith that a more perfect world can yet be built, that goodness and peace can yet abide, that better days are yet ahead. We will not give up on Israel. We will not abandon this critical and miraculous project of Jewish statehood. And we will not stop working to fulfill Israel's vision of freedom, justice, and peace for all. Our hope, our tikvah, is not yet lost. No, it lives, it breathes, it sings. Amen.